During my university years, I was enrolled in a dual degree program, which meant taking 6 courses each semester to finish within 4 years. As you can imagine, this left me buried in homework and studying most of the time. That particular semester, I was also interning, which left me with almost no time to catch up on my coursework. I still lived on campus, and my suite mates could sometimes be quite loud, which made it difficult to focus. It was a Wednesday night. I had 3 classes earlier that day, and my internship. Plus, I had 2 exams scheduled for the next day. Right after wrapping up my internship, I headed straight to the campus library, which was open until midnight. It was a large library, and when I arrived around 9 p.m., there were still quite a few people there, but by 10 p.m., it usually got much quieter. I planned to stay until closing time to get as much studying done as possible. By 11 p.m., most people had left, but a few were still scattered around. I found a table nestled between 2 bookshelves, offering a bit of privacy, which helped minimize distractions. Just after 11 p.m., a man who appeared to be in his late 20s walked into the section. Instead of choosing one of the many empty tables, he sat at mine, diagonally across from me. I glanced up, and he smiled as he settled in, setting his books on the table. Trying to focus on my studying, I brushed off the awkwardness and returned to reviewing slides on my laptop. A moment later, he said, "Excuse me," and asked if I was enrolled in a certain economics course. I politely told him no, hoping that would end the conversation, but he went on to explain why he asked. Apparently, his professor was known for giving pop quizzes every day. I responded with a quick, "Wow, that really sucks," and returned to my work, but by now, my concentration was broken. I had a feeling he wasn't done talking. I glanced up again, and sure enough, he was smiling at me. At that point, I started to feel uneasy. I debated whether I should move to another spot or just leave altogether. Before I could decide, he asked for my name. I made up a name and told him it was Chelsea. He then commented on how blue my eyes were, which only heightened my discomfort. He seemed more interested in me than studying. Trying to make conversation sound casual, I asked him what the name of his professor was. After a pause, he said it was Professor Davis. I followed up by asking if he knew the professor's first name, but he just shook his head, saying he didn't. That raised more red flags for me, so I discreetly pulled up ratemyprofessor.com on my laptop to see if any economics professors by the name of Davis worked at our school. The only result I found was an old calculus professor who hadn't been reviewed in years. At that point, I decided it was best to leave. I packed up my things and walked over to the security guard at the entrance, explaining that the man at my table was making me uncomfortable and that I didn't think he was a student. The security guard accompanied me back to the table and asked the man to show his student ID. The man fumbled around, checking his wallet and pockets before claiming he had left it in his dorm. When the guard asked which dorm he lived in, the man stammered and eventually admitted he couldn't remember. It was clear he was lying. The security guard escorted him out of the library and returned to tell me to be cautious on my way back to my dorm. I thanked him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I tried to refocus on my studying, but my mind kept drifting back to the man. Around midnight, I packed up my things and left, heading in the same direction the security guard had taken the man earlier. As I walked through the near-empty campus, I started to relax. Hardly anyone was out that late during the week, and the stillness felt both comforting and eerie. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, a sharp, distinct step on the concrete. My heart raced, and I quickly turned around, but there was no one there. I was sure I had heard something, though. Panic set in, and I started to run, which, in hindsight, may have been a mistake because the moment I did, I heard running footsteps behind me. I turned again and saw the man from the library sprinting towards me. I screamed, but before I could make much noise, he tackled me to the ground, covering my mouth with his hand. He threatened me, saying if I didn't shut up, he would kill me. At that moment, I genuinely thought my life was about to end. I fought to free myself, trying to call for help, but his hand muffled my cries. He began dragging me by my throat toward a more secluded area, away from the main paths. I could see he was heading for the woods near the dorms. Desperation kicked in, and I managed to pry his hand away from my mouth long enough to scream again. This time, 2 guys nearby heard me and came running, shouting at the man to stop. My attacker immediately let go and took off running towards the woods. The 2 guys rushed to my side, and though they were asking if I was okay, I was in such shock that I couldn't process what they were saying. They called the campus police, and I did my best to stay composed and explain what had happened. We went back to the library, where the security guard confirmed the man's description. The police also reviewed footage from the library's cameras and got a clear image of the man. That night, a picture of him was sent to all students via email and posted on the school website. An anonymous tip led the police to a dive bar nearby, where they found and arrested him. The experience left me deeply traumatized. I can't even imagine the horror for those who aren't as fortunate as I was in situations like that. We moved to a new town when I was 7. Any memories before that move feel like distant early childhood, and most of those memories have become a bit blurry over time. This is one of those memories. It happened at some age before 7. If I had to guess, I was probably 5, maybe 6. There was a local library in town that my mom would always take my brothers and me to. It was just a few blocks away. I clearly remember this one day. It was my mom, my little brother, who was still a toddler at the time, and me. We started the day at the mall, probably spending hours tagging along with our mom as she shopped. Whenever we visited that mall, she'd always take us to the McDonald's inside to get ice cream cones. I remember getting ice cream that day because when we left the mall and headed to the library, I still had some of my cone in hand. When we arrived at the library, there was a section with computers just for kids, and my mom would let me play on them while she went about doing her own thing. After I got bored of the old computer games available, I wandered off through the aisles of books in the kids section, looking for some I Spy books. The kids area was tucked away in the far corner of the library, and as I walked from aisle to aisle, I suddenly heard a noise behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing there, just the back wall of the library with another bookshelf pressed against it. Then I saw half of a man's face peek around the corner of the shelf, and he said, "Peekaboo." I remember giggling, feeling no sense of danger at all. He did it again, hiding behind the shelf, then peeking out to say, "Peekaboo," once more. I laughed again. He asked me what I was looking for, and I told him I was searching for the I Spy books. He said he'd help me find them. The man came over, took my hand, and led me through the aisles, eventually finding the I Spy books. There were at least 5 of them sitting side by side, and I grabbed my favorite one, the Treasure Hunt edition. He suggested we sit down and play, so we went over to a corner by a couple of children's computers and began looking through the book together. We spent some time playing I Spy, and he asked me a few questions about myself. The question that still stands out the most is when he asked, "Who are you here with?" I told him I was there with my mom and little brother. After some time, he casually mentioned there was a playroom downstairs that I hadn't known existed. He suggested we take the book down there. He led me to a door that led to the basement of the library, which, as I later learned, was where events and meetings for clubs and organizations were held. There actually was a little playroom down there, probably for parents who had to bring their kids during meetings. The man brought me to this playroom, which had a variety of toys, most notably a Lego set and a Lego table. He set the I Spy book down on the table. This is the part that makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable in hindsight. As he tried to force me into playing with the toys, I began to feel uneasy. It was around this time that a female librarian's voice came over the loudspeaker, saying, "Will Liam please come to the front? Your mother is looking for you." At that moment, the man went to turn off the lights, leaving us in total darkness. He then said, "We're going to play hide and seek now." That was when I first felt genuine fear. I started shouting for my mom. The man kept telling me to be quiet, his voice growing louder as he got closer to me in the dark. When he put his hands on me, I somehow managed to slip away and ran out the door of the playroom. I sprinted through the dark hallway, racing up the stairs. I remember that same childhood fear of running up basement stairs after turning off the lights. Only this time it was far worse because I truly believed I was about to be caught. I made it back to the main floor of the library and ran straight to the front desk, calling for my mom. She was already there with a group of librarians, and I'll never forget the look of relief on her face when she saw me. I told her that some man had taken me downstairs, and she completely lost it. The next thing I remember is seeing police officers in the building, searching around for the man, but I never saw him again. He must have exited through another way. I also recall speaking with a woman, likely with the police, who asked me a series of delicate questions about what had happened. I've rarely talked to my mom about this experience since it's so uncomfortable, and frankly, I'd rather not think about it. I used to work at the local public library when I was in my early 20s. It was my second job, and I'd work the night shifts at least 3 times a week after finishing my first job. I'd start at 6 p.m. and work until closing time at 9 p.m. I was also responsible for locking up the place after we closed, but I couldn't just leave right away once the library was closed. I had to shut down all the computers, do some cleaning and organizing, restock the shelves with the returned books and DVDs, take out the trash, and only then could I finally leave. It was a Friday night, and we were approaching closing time. Most of the other staff had already left. It was just me and one of the female librarians remaining. I had already made a couple of last call announcements to the remaining patrons, letting them know the library was closing soon. I was starting to clean up, hoping to finish early so I could begin my weekend. The other employee said goodbye as soon as the clock hit 9 p.m., and I announced over the intercom that the library was officially closed. The last 2 guests started packing up their things and left through the door. Once I saw no one else in the building, I locked the front door. I went about straightening the chairs, neatly tucking them under the tables, and then started emptying the trash bins. When it was time to take the garbage out to the dumpster, I unlocked the door again and brought the trash outside. The area around the library was quiet since it was tucked away from the main roads. After bringing the trash out, I locked the door again and moved on to restocking the returned books and DVDs. I started with the DVDs first, as the DVD section was smaller and easier to handle. It took me about 5 to 10 minutes to get that done. While I was restocking, I thought I heard a noise coming from one of the book aisles. Curious, I went to check and found an open book lying on the floor. It was clear that it had just fallen off the shelf. I put it back in its place, standing there for a moment, wondering how it could have fallen. I brushed it off and continued working. After finishing with the DVDs, I grabbed the box of books and started putting them back on the shelves, going in alphabetical order. I had just started with the A's when I heard another noise nearby. 2 noises in less than 20 minutes? That wasn't a coincidence. I set the box down and started walking through the aisles of books again. In another aisle, I found 2 more books on the ground. Someone had to be in here. I walked back out to the open area and called out, "Excuse me, the library is closed." Silence followed, until I heard something coming from the children's section. As I approached the noises, they started to sound like some kind of animal, growling. I also heard books being thrown onto the floor. The sounds were coming from one of the aisles. Building up my courage, I peeked down the aisle and saw a woman in a nightgown, throwing books off the shelf while making these disturbing, animal-like noises. I didn't say anything. Instead, I turned and ran to the office where we kept the phone. At that time, I didn't have a cell phone. I locked the office door and closed the blinds to the window before calling 911. I explained to the operator that there was a strange woman in the library and I thought they should send an ambulance. They asked if I had approached her, and I said no, because she looked like she could be dangerous. The operator then asked if I could still see her, so I opened the blinds and screamed. The woman was standing right on the other side of the glass, staring in. Her pupils were huge, and she looked demonic. I quickly told the operator, "She's right outside the office." The woman started banging on the glass, screaming gibberish. She tried to open the door, and when it didn't budge, she turned around and sat down on a chair facing the office. The operator asked me to keep the blinds open and watch her, and I noticed how wobbly she seemed as she sat there. She was definitely high on something. 2 police cars and an ambulance arrived at the library. The woman was put in handcuffs after she tried fighting the police officers, but nothing she said made any sense. They placed her in the back of the ambulance and took her away. I never found out what she was on or how she got into the library. Maybe while I was taking the trash out, or maybe she had been inside the whole time before I even locked the place up. Either way, from that night on, working alone in the library after hours became a lot more unsettling.